Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Adam White and Jeremy Smith. We passed January already. 2019 is picking up the pace, and Ligue 1 is doing just the same. So let's not delay with what is absolutely filled to the brim show this evening, and we'll have a little bit more highlights than the quote-unquote spectacle last night, and straight into the latest headlines for you. On Friday, Lille flexed their muscles again as they brushed past Nice in a 4-0 win. Raphael Leao, Nicolas Pepe, Jonathan Bamba, and Loic Remy all got on the score sheet while Patrick Vieira's men saw Pierre-Lise Melou sent off just before the end of play. On Saturday, Monaco finally got off the bottom of the bottom two of the table in Leonardo Jardim's first league game back in charge of the club. The Monegasque saw off Toulouse 2-1 to win their first home game of the season, and now the club sit in the relegation playoff place on goal difference. Amiens, the team to drop below them after a 1-0 defeat to Rennes, while Dijon failed to pull further clear as they fell to the same scoreline at Angers. Reims are up to 7th after they won against hapless Marseille 2-1. L'OM now drop to 11th but have a chance at quick redemption as they face Bordeaux at home in a rescheduled fixture tomorrow evening. On Sunday, both Saint-Etienne and Strasbourg and the game between Bordeaux hosting Guingamp were postponed due to weather and policing availability, respectively, while Nant's match with Caen was already moved, with Le Canary winning in a rearranged Coupe de France match that happened on Sunday against Entente 1-0. Montpellier failed to take advantage of Les Verts' week off as they were held 1-1 to Nîmes. And in the final game of the weekend, Paris Saint-Germain's unbeaten season has finally come to an end at the hands of their old adversaries, Lyon. Goals from Moussa Dembélé and Nabil Fekir's penalty were enough to overcome Angel Di Maria's early strike to claim an ill-tempered 2-1 victory. Last week also saw the close of the transfer window with a flurry of deals in and out of Ligue 1. Yuri Tielemans has swapped Monaco for Leicester in a loan swap, with Adrien Silva coming in the other direction. Leandro Paredes has finally completed his move to Paris Saint-Germain, while a number of other sides have bolstered their ranks ready for the second half of the season. And that's all for now, but to keep up to date with all the news in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this evening where else but the fact that Paris Saint-Germain have finally lost a Ligue 1 game. It's taken a good 20-odd attempts, Adam, but it was their old kryptonite that seems to always catch them out in Lyon, who always tend to raise their stakes in these kind of games. But it wasn't without controversy, and the main point I think to talk about is the penalty that does decide the game in the end. Some Paris Saint-Germain fans saying it's a bit soft, and if it was Neymar it wouldn't be given. What's your take on the decision that ultimately won Lyon the game?
I'm surprised that there's been a little bit of sort of backlash against that decision from, well, perhaps unsurprisingly, from PSG fans. But I thought it wasn't the clearest of penalties, but I think it was a penalty. You know, those type of penalties probably given sort of 60-70% of the time, and Dembele is looking for it to some extent, but Silva impedes Dembele as he runs past him. He's getting nowhere near the ball. He may not intentionally trip him, but he does block him off, and he does impede him enough for it to be a foul. And it's a penalty for me. So I think that although you could argue all day whether Neymar would give it or would be given the same thing, I think he probably would, almost definitely. Is fine, but I think it's a penalty, and it was a very much deserved penalty as well from Lyon's point of view. They'd created enough chances to be ahead by that point.
And Jez, it was a somewhat tempestuous affair, as it always tends to be in these big games between, especially these two sides at the moment, really. And Lyon have really had the upper hand of it, but For example, it's not necessarily going to ring alarm bells for Paris Saint-Germain, 9 days ahead of their important Champions League fixture as well. But it wasn't quite the classic performance, and it's a little bit more frustrating with the fact that it's Neymar that's the one who was missing, and he's obviously out for 10 weeks now. Is there maybe still a worry that they maybe didn't do enough in January?
Yeah, I think there definitely is. They certainly had their chances, and it was to an extent a game of two halves. In the first half, PSG scored early, and then Areola was almost sort of one man show, keeping Lyon out, and sort of kind of unfortunate that it was his slip that helped Lyon to equalise. And then the second half, Lyon took the lead early, and it was all for a lot of the rest of the match, it was Lopez keeping PSG out. So had PSG nicked an equaliser, possibly you could argue that a draw was a fair result. And they certainly, we know that they've got enough talent up front, and we saw it in flashes from Mbappe and Draxler and Di Maria to show that they're still going to cause Man United problems going forward. But in defence and at the moment, certainly in midfield, there definitely does seem to be areas where they're lacking and are missing Neymar and maybe even more so Verratti at the moment. And when you've got players like Alves and Marquinhos playing in midfield, I mean, it might be to an extent that Tuchel is trying to make a very elaborate point and to help push Enrique out. But when they're playing in midfield, arguably when Kehra's playing at right back, it does feel a little bit like, to an extent, Tuchel is kind of trying to fit square pegs into round holes, and it's not ideal if they're going to be facing Man United like that. And there are issues with the transfer window, and I think it's quite clear that part of the problem is with Enrique, but I do also think this is a problem that's sort of been coming for years, and still, I think, borne out by the fact that they wasted 400 million on both Neymar and Mbappe when they weren't needed, which kind of restrained them a little bit FFP wise. But they should still have enough about them to do better than they are. And the very first thing I would do, I think, is bring Adrien Rabiot back into the fold. I've said before, I think PSG have overdone it, and whereas a lot of people think Rabiot's burnt his bridges there, I wonder if maybe PSG had now. But the fact is, he is on his day a very, very classy midfielder. And I think that last night shows that they do still miss him. Certainly with Verratti out, they miss that class out-and-out midfielder in the centre. And even if it means swallowing a bit of pride, I really think it would improve their chances against United if he came back in.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see, because we've heard all the stories that Tuchel wants him back in the fold, really, and that they were looking at an extra midfielder. They got Paredes in the end, but they were still looking at Guy. They were even looking at I remember seeing Maximilian Eggestein being another player that they looked at, which makes a lot more sense, more of a box-to-box style player, similar to Rabiot, that would have fit the style at least anyway. But the interesting point from this one, I think, Adam, that some people have maybe not spoken about yet, is obviously Paris Saint-Germain's undefeated record has gone now in the league after 21 games now, and while they're only 10 points ahead of Lille, but I don't think that's in any worry, especially with 2 games in hand. But I suppose the other worry really is for Tuchel, now that unbeaten record has gone, is it maybe going to be a little bit difficult to motivate the players for Ligue games, especially once we head towards sort of the March sort of fixtures when it's all done and dusted? Is there still going to be a competitive PSG on the field in France, or is that going to be one of the hurdles that Tuchel's going to have to face?
It's a really interesting question. I think it's a question that has dogged previous PSG managers and arguably managers of Bayern Munich and of Juventus as well. In those in Italy and Germany, it goes a little bit not underreported but underplayed sometimes, that there are very similar situations in each of the 3 countries. And I think that yes, PSG comfortably clear in Ligue this season, and have been a number of times of late as well, and that's happened in Italy and Germany too. And all 3 of those teams have struggled from the fact that, well, I think it's maybe I should say they've definitely struggled from it, but you could argue that the lack of intensity, having been so far ahead in the league, especially Bayern Munich under Pep Guardiola was a really good example, and aside from PSG, that they've struggled from that lack of intensity, that lack of consistent intensity when it comes to the Champions League, and they play latter round Champions League games against teams who are flat out every week, which may have negatives of its own in terms of intensity and in terms of tiredness and fatigue, but it does give you an extra edge if you're fighting for wins week in, week out, compared to a team that perhaps you could even argue even this weekend that PSG knew that it wasn't a game that had much bearing on their season at all, even though Lyon are huge rivals and they would have wanted to beat them. The way they went about the game, the individual performances, the individual personas and attitudes towards the game, it felt like that they didn't really take it as seriously as they might if there was 2 points between them and Lyon as opposed to 10. And that lack of intensity feeds into those bigger Champions League games. You come up against team who are sharper than you, and in such fine margins count in such big and such sort of closely contested games at the top level. And PSG are a team that has suffered from that. So maintaining intensity is something that a number of coaches at Paris have struggled to master and have brought up in press conferences and mentioned on a number of occasions. I remember Laurent Blanc was one that repeatedly mentioned the fact that they have to maintain the intensity and ferocity and aggressiveness in their play, and he didn't really find a way to do it. And perhaps there kind of isn't, if you're not without the actual fear of defeat, the actual fear of losing your title, you can't play in exactly the same way as you would otherwise. So it's a very, very difficult conundrum, and obviously there are benefits to it. You can rest players, you can be fitter, you can be healthier potentially, you can guard against injuries better, but perhaps that's less important these days when all the players are so fit anyway. So that intensity becomes one of those things that can tip a Champions League game, a semi-final, quarter-final, one way or the other. And PSG perhaps have suffered from that in the past, and Tuchel's going to have to find a way to get around it again, and no one's managed it so far. So it's going to be an extremely difficult thing to master.
As for Lyon, really, Jez, it feels like it's a surprise, but it's not always a surprise because they've done really well in these games against Paris Saint-Germain over the past sort of 2 seasons, really. But I suppose the frustration for a lot of Ligue fans, and you hear this a lot, is that Genesio's sides seem to always pull out these performances against the top 3-4 sides, but it seems to go missing against those games where they should be winning.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not that it's not a surprise that they play well against PSG. It's that it's become completely unsurprising that they raise the games against all the better teams and then tend to go missing in the matches that you expect them to win quite comfortably. And yeah, that's the frustration. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's Genesio being unable to motivate them. I don't know if it's players like Depay who's suddenly thinking Sunday night against PSG, televised all around the world, I'm back in the shop window, so I'll try a bit harder. I'm not sure what it is, but it's for Lyon fans, it must be kind of very satisfying watching a performance like that, and very frustrating that Lyon aren't comfortably second and maybe even challenging for the title rather than still sort of clinging on to Lille's coattails. Look at the players they've got, and there are still a lot of their kind of go-to players, to be fair, are still quite young, and it's still not the strongest defence in the world, but it's still on their day a quality team, as they showed yesterday, even with arguably Aouar and Ndombele, two of their most impressive players, possibly, I'd argue, not even at their best. The fact that they can play like that, is frustrating because, the bottom line is they should be doing better than they are.
And the one big positive, I think, Adam, for a lot of Lyon fans is that they've been looking for sort of a central striker that really worked after Mariano's departure, and they thought they might have someone in Moussa Dembele, who'd obviously done very well at Celtic and was rumoured to be going here, there and everywhere, really, and he's eventually turned up at Lyon. It's never really quite clicked, but this game in particular, he grabs the goal, he gets the penalty, he's probably unlucky he doesn't nick a second as well near the end of the game as well, with a great chance for himself, but this felt more like a game where he's almost like his coming out party in France, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It was a game that sort of underlined what sort of a effective forward Dembele can be. And you're absolutely right. He's had a bizarre sort of Lyon career so far, in that there are so many games when you felt like in the Champions League and perhaps in games similar to this in France, where this is the game that Dembele is suited for. You know, he could cause the centre backs issues. There's going to be a bit more space for him, and as he proved yesterday, he's very capable of scoring goals and putting himself, you know, about defenders and causing issues. And Thiago Silva was, who I thought was really poor yesterday, couldn't handle him at times. But you're right, he's even missed out on the squad previously. He's coming off the bench. He came off the bench something like 8 or 9 games in 10 or 11 before this one, where there were before 3 starts, which was the last one was last night. So he's definitely not first choice by any means, but still only 22. He's still developing, and he's clearly very talented. So hopefully this is sort of an upward curve for him. But for Genesio, I think the issue with Dembele isn't necessarily whether he's good enough to start for Lyon in big games. It's more about balance of the side in general, because if you start Dembele, you've got the issue with Fekir and Depay, and Memphis Depay has proven that he can be pretty woeful or wide on the left or wide on the right in particular, but is far more effective through the middle. And the same goes for Fekir, not necessarily woeful out wide, but definitely far better through the middle. So it's Dembele has almost been a bit of the fall guy, and he's been sacrificed to allow one of those players to start in a central position, because they're perhaps a bit more experienced, perhaps more proven, and arguably, despite Dembele's flashes of good form, they've both been in better form of late overall. And are arguably more important to the team as it stands, even if Dembele is playing like he did last night. Although obviously he does that consistency, that will change. But I think he's almost a little bit sort of his sort of exclusion from the 11 is a product of circumstance rather than his own abilities or his relationship with Genesio or anything like that. So I think that yes, he can, you know, fit the bill in this sort of game, but there needs to be some sort of rejigging in that Lyon 11, because someone's going to have to miss out. And at the moment, it's Dembele more often than not, which makes sense. But keep this form up, and he'll be pushing others out of the team pretty soon.
Yeah, great to see him sort of get more involved. He obviously grabbed the goal, and important one in the derby a couple of weeks ago as well. So it's good to see him start to finally find his feet and find his position in the team. And on to further news, because we've got plenty to get through tonight. And another big one is that Monaco are finally out of the bottom two. Sorry, after spending 2 months in that bottom zone. They're now in the relegation playoff zone, but it does give them a bit more freedom and a bit more confidence, having got that win, Jez, against a difficult ball. What could have been a tricky game against Toulouse, and they've not won a single game at home. So every game at home at the moment has been tricky, and they rode their luck at times. Toulouse had a couple of good chances, hit the post late on as well, but they just look a little bit more. And it's same in the Guingamp game before the red card as well, really. That although obviously they went out on penalties eventually in that cup game, but they just feel a little bit more, I don't know, adventurous. There's a little bit of a spark of creativity that they've missed, and especially in someone in Gelson Martins who's got the 2 assists again. He got an assist in the cup game. He's just added the spark that they needed.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I know not everyone agrees with this, but for me, it's definitely about the players that have come in more than Jardim. And I've said before, and I still feel very strongly that Monaco and particularly Jardim have acted really shittily, and I really feel sorry for Henry. I don't think he was given a fair chance. But yeah, you know, when you've got players like Fabregas who come in and now had a few games, when Lopez is back to sort of full fitness, that's obviously going to make a big difference. And Martins has really hit the ground running. I have to admit, I hadn't seen much of him before. I looked at clips of him. To be fair, I didn't look at sporting clips. I was looking at clips of him at Atletico, and for the most part, it looked like if there was a cul-de-sac to run into, he would find it and run into it, and I wasn't impressed at all. But you can't argue with sort of 3.5 assists in 2 matches, and yeah, it's just I guess a different kind of player, just, you know, real fast, direct runner who's giving them a different angle, I guess, a kind of plan B, and so far so good. I mean, I did see elements of an upturn, and I know not everyone did, but I did in January, and I do think there was a run of bad luck. But as I said, I think last week, it's just a case of getting that first win. You can relax a little bit more, and then push on from there. They've got that, as you said, it was a sketchy win. I don't think it was a particularly good performance. I don't buy the GFFN tweet about, look at the difference in team spirit. I mean, they were celebrating the fact that they finally won a match at home. I don't think that's anything to do with Jardim sort of reinvigorating the team and the spirit within the team. I think anyone would have reacted like that. But they've made that start, and now it's for them to push on.
And that's the important thing now, Adam. It is for them to push on. But there's other small positives really in this game. Golovin has grabbed a couple of goals now as well, and especially at the back as well. They've been a little bit better. But more importantly is the return of Subasic, who was sort of maybe a little bit ostracised for, I suppose, reasons just about unknown for us, at least anyway. The relationship with Henry maybe wasn't the greatest that's sort of forced him out, but he made a couple of important saves at the weekend, and again his leadership and how good a goalkeeper he can be, it will be an important factor in their turnaround.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Subasic is another one because he was fantastic the season that they won the league, and he really dropped off. He was one of the players to really drop off at one point, and was I remember a game against Troyes where he made two massive errors and for two goals. I think they still won that game 3-2, but that was really stuck in my mind as pretty sort of characteristic of his form in the season following their title win. And you had a bit of a sort of, I don't want to say second coming, but like a rejuvenation at the World Cup. He was pretty good at the World Cup, and that I will struggle to forget that save he made from Harry Kane in the semi-final. It was virtually on the post, and there were a number of instances like that. And if they can keep him fit, he's been really injured this season. He's had 2 long injuries, and if they can keep him in form, then he's one of the best keepers in Ligue 1 without doubt. We've seen some really good goalkeeping performances from Areola and Anthony Lopi yesterday, but he's not too far behind at his best, Subasic. So he's potentially a really useful goalkeeper and a leader as well. I think the thing with Monaco is that, this season we talked about a lot on the pod, but the way that their transfer policy switched from signing sort of developing players who'd got some first team experience, who were ready for first team football at Monaco, to signing very, very young players who weren't ready, teenagers really. They needed players like Subasic to be on form and in the team to guide those very, very young players through. And they sort of diminished with the sale of João Moutinho and one or two others. And it was sort of Camel Glick, Radamel Falcao, and then about 10 or 12 or 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. And Subasic is one of those guys that can instruct and lead and guide his team through a game. And when you've got someone like Badashile in front of you who's only 17, okay, he's got Nado and Camel Glick in there too, who can help, but Subasic would be huge for a player like him and his development. So potentially Subasic is great for the side. Just hope he can keep fit and keep in form.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also interesting to see what's happened off the pitch, and we'll come on to sort of a more rounded transfer news later, but I do want to sort of talk about Monaco's business in the window, at least in the last couple of days as well. Jez, they've had a couple of outgoings, a couple of ingoings, and it's interesting to see what's happened both ways, really. I mean, Adrien Silva hasn't had the greatest time in Leicester, but if he's Portuguese, I'm assuming that Leonardo Jardim has a little bit of knowledge about his previous when he was at Sporting, and Kudu returns to our shores, really, from Tottenham after a loan spell at Burnley last season that didn't really do much either, and I'm not sure. I've not heard much of Vinicius, the Napoli player, but outgoings as well. Ait Bennacer was a pretty useful player at the start of the season as well. Barek has gone. Almami Torres left for Eintracht Frankfurt. They've got Yuri Tillemans going out as well, who reports that Jardim didn't really fancy him. It's again a lot of upheaval. I mean, looking at the list now, there's been 8 players gone, and 8 players coming in the opposite direction. That's a lot of business on a January window, isn't it? And a lot of upheaval for this sort of stage of a season.
Yeah, usually we sort of joked before that at the end of the summer transfer window on the LFP page, on the transfer page, you sort of scroll through it, and for most teams there's a little passage, and then for Monaco you're scrolling for ins and outs, but you wouldn't expect it in January. And the fact that there's been so much, as you said, upheaval there this month, I think is a clear sign, that a clear sort of admission that their summer recruitment policy was pretty poor, and they're trying to sort it out. The concern obviously is that they're doing more of the same. I think that the players that they're bringing in are a little bit more experienced. Naldo, okay, he's had those 2 red cards, but until then, and I still maintain the first one was a disgraceful decision, he did look like he was bringing a bit more solidity. Fabregas, is a classy player. As you said, I think Silva could be a good signing. And Kudu, I bumped into a Spurs fan at the weekend, and he was in fits. And so it was hilarious that someone had actually taken him off Spurs' hands. But I think a lot of the transfers are maybe Jardine making his mark. You wonder why he didn't have the sort of sway after everything he did at Monaco to have been able to do that in the summer. But by all accounts, Tielemans has been very disappointing, but possibly is a bit of a scapegoat for the fact that Jardine was furious that Moutinho was sold without his permission. It's a big turnover, and I mean, Toure I've always liked, but it just the last 2-3 years, I think mainly because of injuries, he hasn't pushed on. So a couple of signings, a couple of moves like that, it makes sense that they've gone possibly for Monaco and for the player. Just it hasn't worked out, and maybe it would do them both good to sort of go their separate ways. But it's still playing a risky game. I think that Monaco have brought in enough quality, and more importantly, I think with players like Subasic coming back, like Lopez especially, even Falcao's had injury niggles for part of the season. I still think they probably would have been okay anyway, but I think they've just brought in those 2 or 3 players, Banker as well, even though he got his sort of requisite early sending off. That they should be okay, but it's still, even this month, feels a lot like there's been a little bit too much, just chucking players out and bringing any random players in, and I'm not entirely sure that some great thought has gone into a lot of the signings that have been made. And I just feel they'll survive this year despite the 2 transfer windows, and not thanks to either of them.
Yeah, absolutely. It just feels like that upheaval can sometimes be just as bad as it can be good, shifting some of those players out, even if they were a little bit not quite Jardine's cup of tea. But we've seen it at least positive for now, but whether it carries on is the important thing. And if it does, I'm sure Jardine will be vindicated with the sort of upheaval he's caused, as much as Henry started really more than anything. On to another big result, and usually in these games, in the big wins, we sort of focus on the team that should have won the game. But I want to focus on the team that got the victory first of all, Adam, in Reims, because we do have this tendency to go for the team that's lost it, and the sort of the crisis mode sort of mood of things first. But I just wanted to mention that Reims have got 7th in the table. In their last 10 games, they've lost just 1, and yes, a fair few of them are draws. I think around about 5 of them are draws. But they're in that run. There's games against Lille, 2 against Marseille, and 1 against Lyon, and they've not lost against any of them. And they've got a terrific defence, one of the best records in Ligue. I think they've got the 2nd best record. It might have gone to the 3rd after the week. I'm not 100% certain. Just checking. And they are 3rd. Yeah, Montpellier are just above them, and they have got a better defensive record than Lille. But what a tremendous season they're having. And yet again, they just keep proving the odds wrong. And from the team that we pretty much thought was going to be bottom at the start of the season, they've had a truly tremendous season. They're not going down, and if anything, they might sneak into Europe.
Yeah, it'd be great, wouldn't it, if they did manage to sneak into Europe? I think that they're one of my sort of favorite teams. I hesitate to say to watch, because they're not exactly the most sort of expansive or exciting of teams to watch, but they're one of the most interesting kind of tactically. And I think David Guillon deserves a huge amount of credit. And I think I've said on the pod before, but they may not have, as you mentioned there, they might not quite have the best defensive record, as in conceding the amount of goals, but they have the best defense, as in given their position as a team, their relative standing to the other clubs. PSG are always going to concede less goals than them. They're PSG. But the way that Reims go about their business, the way how compact and solid they are, how consistent that back four is, and how well drilled they all are is unbelievable, really. And some of the results they get, the draw at Marseille. Okay, Marseille's philosophy is to just give it to Florent Thauvin and hope he can win in the game. But even so, they got that 0-0 draw with ease, and we're pretty comfortable in that and a number of other games where they've got some really, really good results. But I think that David Guillon should be sort of in the running for sort of manager of the season. We talked about Sergio Plissier, Christophe Plissier last season in doing a similar job, but this is quite a long-standing thing with Guillon, and he came in and couldn't keep Reims up when Toulouse under Dupraz stayed up. And Zakarian came in when they got relegated. They only finished 8th, I think, in Ligue 2. And Guillon, who's been their youth team coach and their sort of academy director for quite some time, fair few years, sort of assumed the role. And the team that he's built very carefully, from knowing the youth players, bringing through players like Mathieu Cathro, who came from Toulouse, but he's a young player, and a number of others. Remy Udan in particular has done really well this season. And then sort of fantastic scouting. You look at Justin Conan, who came in from Victoria Guimaraes, really left-field signing, and for me has been one of the best fullbacks in the league. He'll be missed for the rest of the season with injury. Repurposing players like Younes Abdelhamid, who is out of favour at Dijon, not playing at all, and dropped down to Ligue 2 with Reims and was brilliant last season. And him and Bjorn Engels, who was really good in Belgium with Bruges and didn't really work out at Olympiacos. But those two players have formed a fantastic partnership. And it's just sort of the way he's got all these sort of different elements of youth and league experience in terms of Alexis Romao and Ligue 2 experience and players that perhaps are more experienced but sort of repurposed into different roles and to rejuvenating them. It's the way he's got it all to gel is brilliant. And you could argue that this transfer window has been another really successful one. Baba Rahman's a really good replacement for Conan and for a club like Reims. And Arba Zanelli, who's a Kosovan midfielder, who's coming from, or wide left sort of winger, coming from Herenveen, looks like a fantastic player. Audience double figures for assists in Holland this season. So they just keep building this team very quietly but very astutely, and Guillon is the man at the head of it. So I think he's done an amazing job, and one that perhaps extends far beyond just this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I already jumped on the Arba Zanelli bus last week on our pod. So should people want to join me soon enough while Reims are slowly climbing up the table, they absolutely are welcome to. But I thought I would leave the bones of Marseille really for you to pick, Jez, because now it gets from bad to worse to even more dire at times for them. They're obviously out both cup competitions now, as well as Europe. They're 11th in the league now, which is almost unfathomable. You would think at the start of the season, you could think that Marseille would be anywhere near that sort of position at this stage of the season. And they've got, like I said in the news, they've got a chance of redemption because a win against Bordeaux in that game in hand really puts them back into 7th, and it doesn't look too bad. They're still only 3 points behind Saint-Etienne at that point. But if they don't win that game, it just adds to the misery that in this game again they just didn't perform at the level we expect from them.
Yeah, from memory, is it this fixture that Marseille haven't won since like 1977 or something? And I think practically almost all of their sort of first teamers, or certainly their big game players, are out. I think Gustavo's just been ruled out, Payet, Thauvin already out. So even going into this match, even sort of between the last match and this match, things have gone into a bit more wrong for them, and it's difficult to see them picking something up from this. It's everything that we've discussed before. You look at their team and their squad, and it's admittedly it's probably not a top 3 team. I know that was the kind of hope at the start of the season, sort of pushing on from last year, but there's no way that team should be languishing in 11th place either. And it just feels that they're in some kind of downward spiral. I don't know if it is that Garcia, that there isn't talk of him having lost the changing room, but it doesn't seem that the players are playing for him. We've discussed so many times before that playing Gustavo in defence doubly cripples you because you're taking away your best midfielder and putting a non-defender in defence. Kamaro's looked so promising. It looks quite lost this season, I think. Amavi has lost all form. I think Strootman has been disappointing. And for me, with the best one in the world, Campos, he runs hard, he tries hard. You can understand why Marseille fans like him. But he's just, I don't think he's really good enough. And it's just, again, we touched on it with PSG earlier, but as much as players have been underperforming, as much as Mandanda looks off his best, Payet looks disinterested, Thauvin looks a little bit increasingly selfish. There's talk that he's a bit obsessed with his own personal stats. You have to look higher up, and they basically bought no one. I mean, there's the two, I think they're both Croatians, that Radonjic at least is getting a couple of starts now and is looking like he's got a bit of promise, but Kaleta Sarr has been a big flop. And they didn't deal with the clear needs that they had at the start, before the start of the season, during the summer transfer window, which was decent, at the very least, decent centre back and decent centre forward. And they brought Balotelli in, but we know that that's a sort of really high stakes game that it will go one extreme or the other. He started well, but he didn't look great. Apart from one really good free kick, he did practically nothing against Haas. And I expect them at some point to pick up a little bit, but they've given themselves a lot to do, and they should be, challenging. I think they should have been challenging for Champions League, and if not, relatively comfortable candidate for the UEFA place, Europa place. And it looks like they're going to fall short of both. And with all the big talk about the Champions project, and with pushing on from a really good last season, in the end slightly unlucky to be picked for a Champions League place in the league, and obviously getting into the Europa League final. This season has just been a massive disappointment, and I do think there's blame at all levels, from the board to the coach to the team as well. And you can certainly understand why the fans are so annoyed.
And I suppose that what's adding to the annoyance, Adam, is that guns are sort of pointing everywhere, really, but no one can pull a trigger. It's like everyone's got blanks in their guns, really. They can't really fire the coach because they don't want to really pay off Garcia, and he has shown that he's got a good aptitude, but he doesn't want to be too spiky to the players because, like Jez says, they don't have the depth really to do anything like that. And the board's taking flack from the fans, but you can only, I suppose, do so much with what you've got, really, Marseille, in terms of actually attracting players in. And they managed to get Balotelli, and he still can't really play 90 minutes, according to Garcia as well, although he has sorted out that haircut, which was nice to see, really, on the weekend. That was one thing that's at least going right for Marseille. But the rest of it just feels like a very similar scenario in a different position to Monaco, in the sense that a couple of wins changes everything again, because then they're back in third, back in fourth, if other results go their way. But at the same time, because you're higher up in the table, it's much harder to just rely on that. And then if they're going into sort of April, May without a chance at Europe, they have to look at internally and evaluate things, and surely something must happen.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think there's an interesting comparison with Monaco there as well, in that it's that they've fallen away in a very similar kind of way. It's just a mess at Marseille. It's an absolute mess. And I know that they've slipped down to 10th in the league, which perhaps it doesn't mean too much at the moment, but given that they're still only 4 points off a potential European place, so it's not disastrous as yet. But given that this team is the same team that made the Europa League final, you have to say that there's something beyond the quality of the team that is affecting their displays, because they at points last season they were genuinely really good. That's after Christmas last season, when they're really on form, they were playing well, and Tuven and Payet were both playing well. They were great in the last stage of the Europa League as well. This may be qualified by the fact that that's kind of down to Florian Thauvin and Dimitri Payet both being on form, and when they're not, Marseille have no other ideas apart from giving the ball. And if they're not on form, then nothing really much happens. But it's such a drop off that there has to be something outside just the sheer quality of the team. Excuse me. And I think it has to come back to Garcia, doesn't it? And I would argue, like Jess was mentioning, it does feel like the dressing room isn't playing for him. These players aren't playing for him. I think Payet even mentioned at a press conference a few weeks ago that that he sort of said, the atmosphere is bad. We were losing games. We can't do anything about that. That's just it really isn't great. And their form is so bad. It goes under the radar a little bit, but they've won twice since mid-November in the league. They beat Amiens 3-1. And since then, I think that Caen game they won a couple of weeks ago is their next league win. And that's getting on for sort of 15 odd games in all competitions. It's just incredible. So I think it's this season is, if it keeps going like this, it's almost write it off and start again next summer. But have they got the money to do that? Yeah, it's just a mess, really.
Yeah, like we say, while they've got something, it becomes more difficult to see how you sort of fix it from where they are. On to the transfer window now, because like we've mentioned a moment ago, there's plenty of comings and goings, and even on the final day they were still motoring when we thought it might be quite quiet in Ligue, and it sort of still all went off. Going through sort of all the teams really, starting at the very top alphabetically, of course, is Amiens. They've let a couple go really. It's mainly on loan, and Ganto's experiment really worked in one way in terms of them getting shirt sales, but other than that, it's not really happened at all for them, Jez. But a couple of interesting loan signings in Eric Peters and Sergio Guirassy. Guirassi's not really done much at Cologne, but Peters has got Premier League experience, a solid left back defensively, if not offensively, which maybe suits Amiens as well. But an interesting move for the Dutchman, and an interesting move from the club as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Amiens window is a little bit a story of sort of back and forth, and the fact that Ganzo and Kazawa left is, I guess, also a bit of an admission that their summer policy wasn't great. And the problem is that they're not Marseille. They're not going to make as many transfers, and it's more important that they get theirs right. And it's not surprising that they're also struggling at the bottom. And I think it's a real pity that they didn't bring Kakuta back in. They tried very hard, and he was such a great player for them when he was there. So that could have been a real boost. But yeah, I think Peters, as you said, has got good experience and should bring a bit of solidity. Guirassy has always been talked about as a talented player, but has never quite sort of reached his potential. So arguably not to the same extent, but that was how a lot of people spoke about Kakuta. So maybe Amiens is quite a nice place for him to sort of come back into French football and kind of find his feet and begin to sort of remake a name for himself. But the concern is that they've probably done as much as they can, but the worry is that they weren't able to bring in enough players to maybe save them from the drop the way things are going.
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? They maybe needed one or two more. Looking at another side that's done some business, Angers, we'll skip over. They've not really done too much, really. A couple of loans out and a couple of players that may add a little bit to them, but nothing major. But Bordeaux have done a bit of interesting business, really. I mean, we'll come on to Varda later because he's joined Saint-Etienne and they've done some interesting moves. But Lerager's gone on loan to Genoa, who wasn't really necessarily getting the game time. Pellinar has gone on to Angers as well. But again, adding to the Madja move, that was the interesting one from Sunderland last week. They've signed Adli from Paris Saint-Germain, who PSG fought hard in the summer to keep him really from the midst of Premier League interest and other European interest. So it in some ways would seem like a coup for Bordeaux, but at the same time for PSG to be so willing to let him go 6 months later, I do understand that they've got a hefty sell-on fee and a potential buyback clause even in the deal. But it seems like a strange one to allow him to go away so quickly.
Yeah, it is a surprise given that they were really keen on him not going to Arsenal in the summer, and he was quite close to that move. And he's a player at PSG that's been highly thought of for some time. Has been in and around their UEFA Youth League team and in France underage teams, and he's supposedly a very very talented player. And the flashes I've seen of him, he's looked really good. But it's for Bordeaux. It's kind of a sign of their new ownership. You know, they've been officially bought out by those American sort of consortium last couple of months, and it's clear that their policy is going to be sign young. Well, it's hardly a surprise because it's sort of the thing that's come to characterize quite a few teams. But they're going to spend money on younger players like Adley with potential to develop and to be sold on at a profit. And him and Madger are two players that, given the Arsenal interest in the summer and given that Madger is English, Premier League clubs would pay a lot of money for both those two players in 18 months' time. If Madger's got 10, 12 league goals at this point next season, or Adley's in the team and playing really well, they could go for 4 or 5 times what they paid for them. So it's sort of a sign of that they're edging towards that kind of policy of that Monaco made successful and that Nice kind of made successful. Although there needs to be balance in there too, as Nice and Monaco have both found out recently, but it's sort of an edging in that direction. But yeah, I think I'm really excited to see Adley get some games. I think he could be a really good addition. And going a little bit beyond him, Tomo Basic has got a few games recently. They signed from Croatia, a 22-year-old midfielder. He looks good as well. So there's got a potential for an exciting team if it all coalesces, but whether it will is obviously a very big sort of question mark.
Absolutely. One deal that's going to interest English fans, because it did go through, and I suppose I almost campaigned for someone to try and get him during this window, because it did seem like a great deal. But he's coming back on loan to France to finish off the season anyway, and that's Frederic Gilbert of Caen. He's been a steady performer for a while, Jez. It's interesting that he's going to Aston Villa, and it's also quite interesting that they've allowed him to sort of return on loan. It may have been part of the agreement with Con to even get him in the first place, but potential there for a real steal for Villa as they try and fight their way back to the Premier League. And even if they are a Championship team next season, he's exactly the kind of good budget signing that they can get in to boost their promotion chances next season as well.
Yeah, it was the reaction to the transfer from Caen fans and Villa fans was quite funny, because it was sort of mixed for various different reasons. I think Villa were quite pleased to bring this player in, but the fact that he's mostly a right back, and I saw quite a few saying, why the hell are we bringing in another right back? We desperately need a left back, and what's the point of signing him now, but not having him with us to sort of make a bit more of a transfer push. And Caen fans were kind of relieved that at least they have him for the rest of the season, but were a bit annoyed about the price that he went for. And I have to say, I agree with them. I think €5 million is a complete steal. I think he's an excellent player. Another of those solid Ligue 1 players who go a little bit under the radar and actually a bit undervalued and underrated. And I think that they've got a great signing there. And I'm slightly surprised that, obviously it depends on who came in with offers, but I'm surprised that having made the transfer to English football, it wasn't to a Premier League team, because I do think he has the quality to play at the highest level. But possibly he's taking this sort of kind of a Pavard approach and thinking I'll take a step down in order to then work my way up. Obviously, everyone knows that Villa are a little bit of a sleeping giant who shouldn't really be in the Championship, and based on the size of the club that they are, and maybe he's seeing that this way he can sort of acclimatise to English football and maybe help them with a promotion push next season.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if I think the real positive of this move as well, and I think you agree, Jez, is if they do somehow sneak into the playoffs and manage to get through and back into the Premier League, Gilbert is someone that will work just as well if they are a Premier League team next season as if they're a Championship team. It's not like his quality will be diminished in the top league as well, which is why, especially €5 million, but it's a crazy signing. There were all rumours that Con were looking around that amount, and I couldn't believe more teams weren't interested in him, because I think that's a real steal. Looking further down the list, Dijon have allowed Johan Gorkov to leave and sort of rescinded his contract. So maybe him might be sort of the last contract he had. It's going to be difficult to see where he fits back in the Ligue. Gang Up have done a fair few moves as of Lille, Marseille. We spoke about Monaco and Montpellier in the past, 'cause Montpellier did their business very early, but not especially. Adam, they brought some players in on loan sort of in the last couple of days, at least. Anyway, they allowed Matt Miazga to go back to back to Chelsea. He's now on loan at Reading back in England. But a couple of interesting loan signings in Edgar Eye, who of Lille, who had done okay in his first season, has sort of drifted very dramatically since then. But also the return of Valentin Esseric to these shores from Fiorentina as well. Had a decent spell back in France. It was a surprise he went to such a team, but not maybe reinforcing a little bit where they need to, but at the back and in a bit of a creative role in midfield as well.
Yes, indeed. I think, Vahid Halilhodžić said recently he needed a lot of players, and their squad has been looking pretty thin recently. And with the way that Kara and Bodji and Matt Miazga both left, it was very acrimonious. They kind of both had their contracts kind of ended, or they're both loans, I think. Kara went back to Anderlecht and Matt Miazga to Chelsea, and of course on loan to Reading from there. So they needed Edgar Eye in there as just a reserve. I agree with you that he was sort of quite consistent-ish for Lille last season, but has fallen off this year. And I don't think he's going to be supplanting Nicola Paulo or Diego Carlos anytime soon. But I really like the signing of Valentin Esseric. I think he's an experienced and proven Ligue player, still only 26. Okay, I think it's a loan from Fiorentina until the end of the season, rather than a permanent deal. But perhaps there might be the opportunity to either get him again on loan next season or to sign him permanently in the summer if he does well, because he's been at Saint-Etienne. He was a little bit in and out of the team at Saint-Etienne, but very good. When on his day, he can be a little bit wayward, but on his day at Saint-Etienne, he was very good. And then at Nice under Lucien Favre, he was particularly good and one of their sort of stand-up players at times for them. And he had a really good start to Fiorentina. Well, there's a period at Fiorentina when he was playing very well. And for a club like Nantes, with their squad sort of thinning, he's a really valuable addition, and the type of player that they don't really have. Perhaps the closest is Gabriel Pascilia, but for some reason, Vahid Halilhodžić doesn't really fancy Pascilia. He had a little injury, and then he hasn't really started one of the last 5 games, and he's sort of fallen out of the team. And there was a period when Cardozo left when he looked like he was really going to kick on, because I like Pascilia. I think he's a talented player, but didn't really pan out. So perhaps Esseric fills that little void. So yeah, good, two worthwhile and needed signings for Nantes.
Absolutely, and some interesting ones further down as well. We've spoken about Reims' moves. Rennes have brought in a few loan players as well that to sort of bolster ranks a little bit. But I briefly mentioned Ligue earlier. Jez, they've brought in 2 midfielders on loan and allowed Dioisi to head out on loan as well, to just back to Italy, Chievo, to get some game time, but brought in Valentin Vada, who's been good previously with Bordeaux, but has sort of drifted out of the team this season. And Benacer, was good at Caen on loan last season, had okay spells for Monaco early this season when they needed a defensive midfielder. 2 players that maybe add to that bonus, especially with the rumours that Omele Selnesh was looking at a move during January, and even Chinese interest as well maybe might sort of drift him away before their deadline, which is late February as well. Although he might be angling for somewhere come summertime as well. It's a good idea for them to bring in a couple of midfield replacements as well as players that maybe they look at in the summer if they do come available.
Yeah, I think bringing the 2 in possibly is some kind of cover in case either they agree to let him go or he goes on some kind of strike or something. He clearly wants to leave. But the 2 that they brought in, I think, are really accomplished midfielders. Always liked Bordeaux, and I was surprised that he was kind of more of a consistent fixture in the team. But I think he did well there when he was given the chance. And Benacer is one of those players who, in his breakout season at Nancy, albeit in Ligue 2, he looked absolutely awesome. He hasn't quite sort of continued that sort of upward trajectory. Signed by Monaco and then went back to Marseille and did okay, but they were struggling this season. As you said, Caen, I just thought it was one of those. No offense to any Caen fans listening, but it feels like everything about the club is sort of okay but average, and even the most talented players kind of eventually retreat back to average as well. So maybe that wasn't entirely the best place for him. And as you said, I do think he it was great to see him being given a chance at Monaco, and at times really did look like he was going to make a starting place his own, but it hasn't quite worked out. So I think I'm sort of quite excited about this move, because it's not a sort of downward move like the other two have been in order to get games. This is, well, based on this season, certainly an upward move, if anything. And it would be great to see whether he manages to establish himself in the Saint-Etienne team, and with better players around him. I think he really could thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of the final tidbit I wanted to mention as well, that Todibo had announced his move to Barcelona was going to happen in the summer. Barcelona have sort of given a bit of a nudge to move that forward, really, with Todibo going to Spain now for them. Do you think that's the right move for the player? I know he wasn't exactly always getting game time at Toulouse at the moment because of this move and the way it's gone about. But at the same time, he's not really going to get game time, I can't imagine, at Barcelona from now until the summer. And even then, he's maybe going to be a bit pot player next season. So was it the right idea for the player to be moving now and not spending the next 6 months in France, at least getting some actual game time under his belt?
Yeah, I think if it was all things being equal, I think he would have. Well, I think all things being equal, the sensible course of action would have been for him, as for his development, is to stay in France for not just the rest of the season, but at least one more season as well. He'd only played 10 senior games with Toulouse and come out of nowhere. But obviously, there are a number of caveats to that statement. First of all, that the player was only on a youth contract and had turned down a full contract, which meant his youth contract would have been up in the summer and he could have gone wherever he chose. And obviously, given the way that he'd been sort of parachuted into the team and Toulouse had developed him, and Olivier Sedan, the president, wasn't happy about that. Whether you agree with that decision or not to sort of exile him from the first team, you can understand his frustration at that sort of course of action that the player took, having played just 10 games for them, and he was already getting interest from Napoli and stuff. And I can understand, but then from Tobias's point of view, you want to develop your career, and I can understand why he would have angled for a move. Perhaps doing it so aggressively, it was perhaps a mistake, but he's turned up at Barcelona, so it's kind of, you could argue that it's panned out okay for him. And I think from Barcelona's point of view, they were worried about his development going ahead, because Toulouse are pretty clear they weren't going to play him for the rest of the season, and he would just sit on the bench, or well, not even on the bench, in the stands or away from the ground, not playing even for the CFR team. So it would have really stunted his development that started so wonderfully. So he may be playing for Barca B, but for the rest of the season, perhaps, or maybe getting more games than he would for the first team. But for his development as an individual and as a player over the next 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, it makes sense for him to be playing for consistent football now, whereas Toulouse weren't going to be giving that to him. So I think, given the situation as it had panned out, it made sense for him to go to Barca now. And even if he's not playing for the first team, he's an extremely talented player. I'm upset that he's left, because he was brilliant for Toulouse. It was so exciting to see him come through. But for him personally, I think it makes sense for him to go to Barca now, even if he's playing for Barca B.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always important by the player, but you can also understand why Toulouse have sort of not done anything on that one, because they're not getting any return on this. So why should they really take any bother in it anymore? Before we end it, let's do our Liga snapshots. We can just about squeeze them in this evening. And I'll start with yourself, Jez. What's your Liga snapshot this week?
I'm going to go back to where we started. I thought, I think officially Dembele was made man of the match for Lyon, but I thought Denayer was absolutely immense all match, and his flying goal line headed clearance, I think in the last minute of the first half to keep it level going into half time, was spectacular, and the way Lopez sort of jumped on top of him to congratulate him or thank him for keeping the ball out. I just really enjoyed that.
Adam, what's your Liga snapshot?
Very briefly, I sort of wanted to touch on the ownership situation at Nice. I'm just because I think it's something that is going to be a really interesting subplot for the rest of the season. And obviously we haven't got too much time because we're sort of coming to the end of the pod, but just for our listeners to sort of keep an eye on how it pans out, because just as a sort of brief overview, the club were extremely well run, as we've seen in recent times, under Lucien Favre and Claude Puel, by Jean-Pierre Rivière and Julien Fournier, who are the sort of the guys in charge of sort of the general manager and the I think the president of the club, and they did extremely well to develop them as an entity, to develop the academy, bring young players in, and reinvest the money that they made from transfers, which was substantial, back into the club. And there was a snowball effect at Nice that they were really developing under Puel, and then really kicked on under Favre. And they were looking for investors, and they found a group of investors in the American Chinese kind of consortium who were also part of Barnsley, and or they have a stake in Barnsley as well. And they sort of became decision makers on transfers, when Julien Fournier in particular was very sort of sharp in his business and managed to sign players sort of very sort of astutely, and the scouting was fantastic. But unfortunately, there seems to be a shift away from the model that works so well under Rivière and Fournier to a hyped up model of the Monaco situation in the summer, where they're sort of turning down the experienced players, vetoing experienced players that were proposed to them, like Riyad Boudabous, Yunus Belhanda, those players who would have come in to be like really good mentors to the young players that they're signing to. And it kind of feels to me that now that Rivière and Fournier have decided to leave because of the situation that's developed, that Nice have sort of been left without their two sort of guiding lights, if you like, who've done so well to develop the team. And Patrick Vieira is left, having been their man, having been Rivière and Fournier's man, is sort of left in isolation, and it's sort of caving in on him a little bit, because he done well to sort of settle the team down and get them getting results, not playing particularly good football, but they're getting results. And he's sort of been denied the quality that he really needs to be bringing into the team, like those players I mentioned, because it just feels like that the guys now in charge are there to simply make money off players, and the bringing the sort of focus on bringing those young players in, and they want to sell them on, which I've seen Monaco make so much profit by doing that. But they're sort of lacking the balance, and it's really worrying if you're a Nice fan and if you're invested in the club, where this could end up, because it seems to become a little bit of a vehicle for selling on players, which is from my book not the right way to go about things. Even though it's very important to develop young players, and you can understand that model, it feels like it's sort of gone a little bit too far. And I just think it could be, obviously there's a long way to go, but I just worry that it could be a bit of a cautionary tale for other teams who follow a very similar model to they've got to be a little bit more sort of astute about the way they go about building a team and a squad. And I just wanted to highlight that, just in case they start to drop off and have a very interesting summer window where they don't bring in that experience that they really need, and that Monaco have lacked so badly that so far this season. So Nice hopefully will find a way to bring back the magic of Fournier and Rivière, who did so brilliantly to develop the club.
I think on that we talked about how Marseille are lacking a striker, but Nice have been desperate for one this season, and you look at their transfers this window, and there's nothing there basically. There's just Balotelli out, nothing else. And I do think Vieira's done a really good job in a relatively tough situation this season. But yeah, as Adam said, he's not being backed, and the concern is that he is going to be a little bit isolated, and you worry for his position through no fault of his own.
Yeah, and then you also think that, given that he has done a pretty good job, given that they have, other than the battering really they got on Friday night, they've been pretty sturdy this season, that other teams may be having a look at him and thinking of maybe prizing him away from a tougher situation. I think my Liga snapshot this week is a pretty easy one, really, and it includes the Premier League as well, because the tributes to Emiliano Sala this week, both in midweek against Saint-Etienne, were absolutely wonderful across France as well, and the scenes we saw in Cardiff as well. I mean, you could see how much the player meant to those around him. It was great to see the Salah shirts in that game against Saint-Etienne midweek, but also you could see not just the emotion, I'm sure, very a lot of the English fans saw on Neil Warnock's face at the end of that Cardiff game, but also the Vahid Halilhodžić as well. But during that sort of I can't remember, it's a very early one, wasn't it? It was his shirt number minute. They brought the game to a whole
minute.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and
the most heartbreaking one was Yassine Banri before the match. just bawling his eyes out. It's really, really heartbreaking.
Yeah, and you could see it had a Halil Hodzic and it hit the players as well, and really sad. And at least in a kind of way, glad that the search has sort of gone on and they found the plane. And while we don't fully have confirmation yet, there seems to be at least some kind of closure for the family in terms of his whereabouts. But obviously the sort of investigation into what's happened and why it's happened, and the inquest that will go into that, I suppose it will drain on. But our thoughts are still with his family and at this time, and it was beautiful to see them so respectfully tributed over the weekend as well. It was great to see. That's all that we have time for this week. My thanks to Adam, Jez, and all of you listening at home. Do join us for the preview show on Thursday, and the main show will be back at the same time, same place next week. A bientôt, and goodbye.